The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
Countdown to a walkout. Will Chicago teachers head to the picket lines? And what's at stake for CPS teachers, students, and parents? Plus, the CPS pension mess. The shortfall is now approaching $10 billion, and the debt dropped to junk status. Who is to blame? And the impact on Mayor Emanuel. What does all this mean for his political future? Stay with us for these stories and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening, I'm Chris Bury, and welcome to In the Loop. Chicago Public School teachers could walk the picket lines as early as next Tuesday if CPS and the teachers union don't reach an agreement. CPS, facing a budget crisis amid declining enrollment, is asking teachers to contribute more toward their retirements. But union leaders argue Mayor Emanuel could do more to protect teachers' jobs and give them raises. Meanwhile, students, parents, and even some teachers find themselves in the middle of the battle, and they are preparing for the worst.
Well, this is Emma's tablet.
I'll take yours.
No!
Frances Collins Sussman is one of thousands of parents preparing for a possible teacher strike next Tuesday. Collins serves as chairwoman of the local school council at Pritzker Elementary, where her son Tobiah is a second grader and Emmett is in the 5th grade. Collins, who is a stay-at-home mom, says a strike would disrupt her kids' education and daily schedules.
It throws off their routine. They're just settled in. It's the 4th week of school, so they've gotten their rhythm going, and this will break that, and we'll have to start over a little bit when we come back. But mostly, it confuses them why it has to happen. It's an emotional impact.
But even with the impact a strike would have on their family, Collins and her children support their teachers and plan to show their commitment by walking the picket lines with them, just as they did during the last strike 4 years ago.
It is frustrating that it has to happen, but I think you'll find most parents, we trust our teachers, and the conditions they're being put in aren't right. So, we have to struggle through. We have to figure out what to do with our kids. We have to figure out how to support our teachers.
Andrew Johnson, who teaches social science at George Westinghouse College Prep on Chicago's West Side, is one of those teachers. He says working in the Chicago public school system gets more challenging each year.
The last 4 or 5 years have been really difficult. So many waves of budget cuts, seeing colleagues laid off, seeing the chaos of seeing the uncertainty has made for a difficult work environment.
Johnson has worked for CPS for 10 years. Last March, he expressed his frustrations by writing an opinion column for the Chicago Tribune entitled "CPS Teachers Need Resources, Not Blame for Long-Term Success." While the fight over who should make pension payments is taking center stage, Johnson says there's much more to talk about.
We would love to see enforceable class size limits as well. We would love to see enforceable expectations about social workers and nurses and librarians in our schools. We feel like we've been doing more with less, and we feel like our students have been doing more with less.
These are some of the concerns that led Karen Lewis, president of the Chicago Teachers Union, and other union leaders to set a strike date.
We're on strike as of October 11th if we have not reached a tentative agreement. We've gone over an entire year without a contract.
We're seeing the loss of librarians, the loss of clinicians, the loss of special education services, the loss of busing services. We're seeing class sizes get larger. And so we're asking for some simple assurances that the public schools themselves will be defended against further cuts. And we know that Rahm Emanuel has it within his power to solve this problem.
Union leaders are calling on the mayor to use money from special tax districts, known as TIFs, to protect teachers' jobs, fund pay raises, and bail out the struggling school district. But Mayor Emanuel says the teachers have already received a fair offer.
This notion of taking a strike, it's one of choice, not of necessity. because you have a 13% pay raise on the table.
Emanuel also emphasized that CPS is already benefiting from TIF money, and using more of those funds would only be a temporary solution.
The primary recipient of TIFs are the public schools. So they've been helping modernize our schools, helping invest in our schools. That is the primary place we spend our TIF resources. We will, in my budget, have another sweep of TIF surpluses, but don't mistake long-term stability for a short-term one-time.
If there is a strike, CPS will cancel classes and extracurricular activities, but all schools will remain open. Free breakfast and lunch will be provided. Schools will be staffed with non-union employees. And now joining us to talk more about CPS and the possibility of a strike is Juan Perez Jr., reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and welcome back, Juan.
Thanks for having me.
Always good to see you here. You have your ear as close to the ground as anyone here. Where would you place the odds right now of a strike next week?
That's a good question. That's the question that's on everybody's minds right now, is how close are we to the brink? And really, right now, I don't know. We are at a point where union members have described it as the 10th and a half hour. Let me put it that way, the 10th and a half hour of 11 hours. And there's every indication at this point that these negotiations are going to stretch well into the weekend, well into Monday, right up to the brink, right up to October 11th, right up to the point where teachers say they're going to walk out unless they can get a tentative agreement. So at this point, every indication is that we're really going to see whatever movement that we're going to see is going to happen here over the course of the next 36, 72 hours.
But would you say there is some hope for a last-minute deal?
Privately, I think folks are trying to sound some notes of optimism that, yes, they can reach a deal, that there is room to arrive at some sort of agreement. But at the same time, they are still pretty far apart on certain things. The union wants a lot of money that the city and the school district says it doesn't necessarily have to offer. So how are they going to be able to arrive in the middle? I think a lot of that is going to depend on whether the union is able to receive something that they think they can sell to the members, that they can actually take back and say, this is the best that we can do.
And of course, one of the huge questions here is, okay, where does that money come from? And the teachers have asked more TIF money, these special tax financing districts, and the city has been reluctant. Do you see these TIF funds as the white horse riding to the rescue?
If it's a white horse, it's, there is some justification to the idea that it's only a horse that's going to show up at once, and how frequently is it going to be, how will it be able to fund a contract agreement in future years is an open question that I think still needs to be answered. One thing that should be clear here is that the school district is going to receive, or is at least planning on already receiving, about $32 million in these TIF surplus funds. It usually gets these funds every year. It's planning on $32 million this year. And as you heard the mayor said, he suggested that there's going to be an additional sweep of money that's going to come in. The big question, though, is how much is it going to be? How much is actually going to be able to come to the school system? And then is that going to be enough to actually reach a deal here?
Is that up to the mayor, to make that decision?
I think he has a lot more control over these TIF districts than he would for a lot of these other proposals that the union has come up with to bring more revenue into the school system. At the same time, though, there's some political trickiness there too, because a lot of this money is reserved for projects all over the city, right? And so that can be a little bit difficult to go to an alderman and ask an alderman, like, I need some of that TIF surplus money to go into the district, and that's not money that you're going to be able to use for a community project in your ward or some other kind of piece of public infrastructure.
The other big sticking point seems to be the idea of teachers contributing to their pensions. Right now, the city picks up 7% of the 9% that's contributed to their pensions, and the city, the CPS, wants teachers to pick up that 7%. Is this the toughest sticking point in these negotiations?
There are a lot of teachers who will say that the compensation issue is not nearly as important to them as, say, bringing in more funds into a school district that is definitely struggling with its finances right now. I think one of the key things that's kind of changed as far as the dynamic now compared to the dynamic that occurred in the last teacher strike is that last time, a lot of people were taken to the streets to kind of push back against this idea of education reform, right? This sort of anti-union push to bring in these new ideas into the public education system that the labor union has seen as a threat, frankly speaking. This time, though, the district's finances have taken center stage as far as the negotiations are concerned. And so let's be clear, compensation is definitely a factor here. Teachers and the union leaders have certainly unequivocally stated that cuts to compensation are something that they need to protect their membership from. And so that includes the pension pickup.
But part of this compensation question, isn't it a matter of definition? Because these cuts are not, strictly speaking, pay cuts, right? They are cuts in the amounts of contributions the teachers make to their own pension. So they're going to get this money, right? It's just deferred, and it's a matter of who's contributing.
Yeah, the union would see an additional contribution towards their retirements as a decrease in compensation, because that's less money in my paycheck every 2 weeks that has to go towards this other fund. Same goes for the idea of the health insurance contributions too. That's less money that I see in my paycheck every 2 weeks because I have to pay higher premiums or higher costs of health care. So those are definitely two critical levers here. But we've also talked about this before, the idea of a broader cost of living pay increase, kind of a base increase that happens over every year of the contract. And in addition, this idea of step and lane pay bumps that are awarded to a teacher based on their education levels, based on their years of experience. Those are two other valves that are kind of have to be tinkered with here to kind of find some sort of equilibrium here that can be, deemed advantageous to everybody here. The district would argue that they've got to stay within the framework of the deal that was reached back in January 29th with the leaders of the union and the school district, although it was ultimately rejected by a bargaining unit of the union here. So that goes back to the central question: how do they reach an agreement? Well, how are they going to be able to find some kind of consensus within these sort of flexible but still reasonably rigid, frames?
Where do the CPS finances fit into this? We just heard in the setup piece, we've got declining enrollment. We know that there's a looming pension issue. We've seen hundreds of teacher and staff layoffs in just the last couple of weeks. And how does that figure into these negotiations?
That has certainly been one of the key things I think that the district has come back to the union with. Okay, you've got this proposal. How are you going to pay for it? You've got this proposal. How are you going to pay for it? We can't afford this. We can't afford that. I think some of that's natural, right? You're going to see that, no employer is going to, at least in this kind of environment, going to concede on everything. The finances are always going to undergird any kind of negotiating.
But as we're watching this and as parents are watching this, you think it's going to go right down to the wire next week. Okay.
You bet. Stay tuned.
Juan Perez, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Enrollment numbers, as we said, are down throughout the district, which follows years of students exiting. And to cap it off, the impact of the district's recent credit rating drop could cost CPS millions of dollars. Lauren Cohn takes a look at even more challenges facing Chicago Public Schools.
The news couldn't be more bleak for Chicago Public Schools. According to the Chicago Public School District, enrollment dropped by 3.5% this year. That's a loss of 13,000 students, which is more than double what the district predicted. It follows a decade-long pattern of student exits. Published reports say CPS is blaming the loss on declining birth rates, a slower influx of undocumented workers, and African-American families leaving Chicago. But there has also been great instability, including mass school closings last year, deep budget cuts, and a teacher strike in 2012.
What do we want? A fair contract! When do we want it? Now!
CPS is also facing a pension shortfall of close to $10 billion due to a mismanagement of funds. Ted Dabrowski, the vice president of policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, says for years, CPS failed to make pension payments.
What's not talked about is where that money went, and that money continued to go into higher and higher teacher salaries and administrative salaries. And so as those salaries went up, the obligations in the pension fund went up even faster.
Currently, CPS teachers pay just 2% of the 9% pension contributions required by their contract. CPS picks up the remaining 7%. The financial burden has been passed on to taxpayers, who have been saddled with tax hikes to cover the cost, while seeing little movement to fix a broken system.
I don't think it's fair to tax the people more to get the crisis taken care of. They should try to find other ways around it.
It's really a tough situation because the politicians screwed up. They're going to blame the teachers, and the teachers can do better and they can be more efficient, and the whole CPS can be more efficient.
This is something that both ends have to just come to the table and negotiate on.
And to cap it all off, Moody's Investor Service dropped the district's credit rating further into junk status.
Who's really left out of this discussion are the children and the parents. They're the ones that should be in charge. Parents should be the drivers of what's going on. What's dramatically wrong is that the union, who claims they care about the kids, is willing one more time to strike against the kids and put the kids out of school in order to demand more money from the taxpayers who are already struggling to begin with.
Earlier this week, I sat down with President of the Civic Federation, Lawrence Massal, to discuss where CPS goes from here.
Lawrence, the Civic Federation provides detailed analysis and recommendations on government finance issues. So how would you at this point characterize the financial conditions of CPS?
The financial condition of the Chicago Public Schools is not good. It can be seen in their junk bond status. They're less than investment grade by the rating agencies. They still have a very significant budget deficit. Even though they receive some extraordinary help from the state of Illinois and from Mayor Emanuel in terms of allowing for a property tax increase to help stabilize their pensions, they still are hundreds of millions of dollars short in what they need for their operating budget.
So you brought up the state. Do we see the state coming in and rescuing it at this point, or no more from the state?
No, I think everyone is looking to the state of Illinois to resolve its financial crisis as well. The state has been operating for almost 2 years without a budget. That has an enormous cost on the Chicago Public Schools, the city of Chicago, and every other government or anyone else who depends on the state. So the state needs to come together, the state leaders in Springfield and the governor, and pass a budget. It's something that every other state in the United States has, a budget, and that's how you manage a government, with a budget. Without a budget, the state of Illinois is incurring literally billions of dollars more than it has available in revenue.
Now, you brought up the recent property tax hike, which is a lot on taxpayers. Can we expect, considering the situation that we're facing with CPS, more tax hikes for the taxpayers?
Well, it's very difficult for the Chicago Public Schools to look at how they're going to close their deficit without some significant help from the state, in addition to what was already provided. Basically, they were given authority, the city of Chicago, to raise property taxes by about $250 million. The city already provides to the Chicago Public Schools, the city taxpayers, about $2.5 billion. So that's in effect a 10% increase in the property tax revenue. But even that's not enough to close the deficit. The state of Illinois needs to get its financial house in order, stabilize its government, increase its credit rating to reduce the borrowing costs for the state of Illinois and local governments, and provide reasonable assistance and predictability for all the other local governments, including the Chicago Public Schools.
So what about the debate over the pensions and the contributions that the teachers are facing? What should happen there?
There, it's a case where the teachers are on the wrong side of history in opposing paying for their own pensions. Every other unit of government, whether it's the city with its firemen or policemen, the employees contribute to their pensions. In a quirk, back in 1982, the Chicago Public Schools decided that they would not have the teachers make their employee contribution, and now it totals about 7% of the 9% employee contribution. Every other government does that. It'd be different if the Chicago Public Schools was flush with resources, but it's not, and it can't afford that generous benefit. Yes, it will be a reduction in the disposable income for teachers, but it's a reasonable share. But the taxpayers have just contributed $250 million more in terms of the teachers' pension fund. More is going to be needed. There's going to have to be joint sacrifice.
We've seen enrollment drop. We've seen more layoffs at CPS. This affects the families, this affects the children that go there. What are the consequences then of a strike?
The consequences of a strike can be very severe. We've seen in the past, when Chicago had a history of constant teacher strikes, that enrollment drops dramatically. It's not just a strike, it's the uncertainty and the constant uncertainty as to whether your kids are going to have a place to go to school, whether they're going to be provided for, or whether people are going to have to make and look and explore other options. It has a result in not only driving people to other options, perhaps private schools and parochial schools, but it also has the effect of driving people out of the city if they don't think there's a stable public school system. The Chicago Public Schools have made enormous strides in terms of the quality of the educational experience in the last 15 years. It would be a shame to see those improvements denigrated by a protracted strike that drove population out of the city or drove parents to look to other alternatives. Even without the strike, the Chicago Public Schools are reporting that they've lost about 12,000 students this year from the same time last year. That's at a time when the cost of the Chicago Public Schools is rising and its student population is dropping. That's untenable.
The Civic Federation has criticized CPS transparency in the past. So what do you think can be done to improve that?
Oh, they can come up with a long-term plan. This budget that is an emergency budget that Forrest Claypool and the Chicago Public Schools have approved has some big holes in it. It relies on significant concessions from the teacher's contract, including the give back on the pension contribution. It relies on significant funding from Springfield, a promise of over $200 million if the governor and the legislature reach consensus on a pension reform proposal. We can't even find details of what that proposal would be, let alone whether they will reach consensus. So the Chicago Public Schools would benefit the city, the teachers, the students, the parents, if they laid out what Plan B is if they don't get those. Unfortunately, what Plan B looks to appear is very significant and dramatic cuts in terms of the employment roles, the teacher roles, and without a systematic way of evaluating how to make those cuts.
Lawrence Massall, thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lauren. Teachers Union President Karen Lewis has been an outspoken critic of Mayor Emanuel and supported his opponent in the last election. So how will another teacher strike figure into the mayor's political future? Joining us is Mike Flannery, political reporter for Fox 32 Chicago, and welcome back, Mike.
Well, thanks, Chris. Good to be back.
So in this potential strike, what are the stakes for Mayor Emanuel?
Well, he was enormously damaged by the last walkout 5 years ago, but he was able to bounce back and to defeat the teachers union at the polls. The only poll that counted was that one where he defeated Chuy Garcia, despite the best efforts of the teachers union. I think this time the PR battle is not quite as lopsided as it was in 2011. I think that there are some people wondering, what is the teachers union thinking? There have been gigantic tax increases imposed by the Board of Education, by the city. There are more coming from the state. Taxpayers are played out. I think that loss, we heard Lawrence Massall in the interview with Lauren there talk about the 12 or 13,000 students who have left the system.
Enrollment dropping.
Enrollment dropping. I think the teachers union has to own a big piece of that. They've been talking for over a year now about this strike. There have been multiple votes. Parents saw this coming. It's like a hurricane that's been spinning out there for over a year.
Well, as we know, Karen Lewis has been a big opponent of Rahm Emanuel, once famously called him the murder mayor. Does she still...
He said some things to her too, didn't he?
True. So let's say it's
that we can't repeat here.
It's been an acrimonious relationship on both sides. Who's got the upper hand this time?
Well, I think the losers in this piece are the kids and the parents and the school system itself, which sees the enrollment declining. I mean, the system can't afford that. That's why we're getting this new round of teacher layoffs, because, as you know, for every kid now, every kid represents thousands of dollars in state aid. So the system has been a loser. The kids have been a loser. The parents have been losers. I think that the mayor and the teachers union are neither one's going to profit from this. Clearly, the teachers don't want to suffer a pay cut. They don't want to endure that, as I understand it. The Board of Ed last week was talking about having put on the table an offer that would give almost everybody a raise except for 3,000 or 4,000 of the most senior teachers. And I think what we're going to see in these last few days and hours is some sort of formula to make sure that those 3,000 or 4,000 of the most senior people, 20, 25, 30-year teachers, are also taken care of. And that when they pay their pension, when they make the full pension payment, that they don't get a cut.
We've seen the teachers union
paycheck.
As you say, they've been preparing for this, lots of rallies. But something kind of new here is that they've been joining forces a lot with other activist organizations, such as Black Lives Matter, trying to make this a wider social movement and not just a teacher's issue. So does that make them more formidable this time?
Well, it's not new. I mean, the teachers union has, we've seen they have an arm that makes contributions, both cash contributions to some of these groups that have rallied around them. Sometimes you'll see some of the community activists who will rise and speak up on behalf of the teachers union. Some of them, a number of them, have received, they or their organizations have been getting money from the teachers union. So this isn't new. Yeah, but they have a substantial, they have a substantial community profile, and I think the mayor, he's much more understated this time. He's not throwing down the gauntlet the way he did back in 2011. I think he's learned a hard lesson. Karen Lewis chuckles about it when she discusses it. They beat him around the head and the knees with a baseball bat the last time.
He's also seen his approval ratings since the whole Laquan McDonald affair plummet. They were down to 30-some%. Last couple of weeks, they've been climbing back a little bit. He gave the big speech on crime. He had a victory on police oversight in the city council. Is the mayor politically climbing out of the depths a bit?
None of those issues are solved or even resolved. Yes, the police oversight issue, that proposal got through the city council, but it has a lot of undone pieces to it, right? Without going into all the details, there's still lots of potential political battles ahead. And here's the piece, Chris, that I think the mayor dreads. He knows it's coming. There are going to be homeowners and condo owners and business owners, small business people who are going to be opening those envelopes with the property tax bills, with the water and sewer and garbage fee bills, and they're going to. That's going to be hundreds of thousands of little explosions, and Rahm knows now that the mayor wears the jacket for all of this. So I don't think that means anything good over the next few years for his political future.
Let's look ahead, since you're a political reporter, and we love to talk politics this election season. Just looking ahead to 2019, realizing how far it is away, any names bubbling up there as potential challengers?
Well, I'll tell you, people talk about former Governor Pat Quinn.
So Quinn could come back?
Potentially
running. We have a few seconds left. Who else?
Chuy Garcia, I think, is a very much a possibility. Tony Preckwinkle, Sheriff Tom Dart. So
on that note, we have to wrap and look forward to 2019. Mike, thanks for your time today. That concludes this week's show. You are now in the loop. To learn more about our show, log on to our website, wycc.org, and connect to In the Loop. Until next week, for Lauren Cohn, I'm Chris Bury.